Okay, so let's start our webinar. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Navigating EU ETS in the Maritime Industry. I'm Ibar, joined by my co-moderator, Richa. Today, we will explore how the EU ETS impacts the maritime sector and discover pathways to seize the opportunity in the evolving landscape. We have an exceptional lineup of speakers ready to provide valuable insight, so let's dive in. Before we start, let's go over some key information to ensure everyone is on the same page. The webinar will run for about 1 hour, where the last 15 minutes will be Q&A. So please note, this webinar will be recorded and we will direct you to the recording and the materials after the webinar. So you can send in your questions in any time during the presentation from the Zoom control panel. The panelists will collectively address them during the Q&A session. So during the webinar, we will do some poll questions to gather your opinions. Now that we have those logistics covered, I would like to welcome our panelists for today, who will provide some thoughts and actions to us. So our first panelist is Mr. Simon from ACT. Second panelist, Mr. Kim from Korean Register. The last panelist, Mr. Sanjeev from Varuna Marine Service. So before we move ahead, here's a quick poll question for you all. The voting is open for 10 to 15 seconds. Well, what's next is meeting our first panelist. Mr. Simon has worked for ACT for the past 3 years as one of their EU ETS traders, drawing from his experience as a head of Swedish, Bulgarian, and Italian market. He has in the past year specialized as a head coordinator of ACT's efforts in the maritime industry. So let's hear from our first panelist, Mr. Simon. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for everyone that has joined us on this webinar today, and a special thanks, of course, to Varuna Marine Services, who are hosting us today and who invited me here to speak. So I will be talking about the inclusion of the maritime sector in the ETS. Firstly, perhaps, is a brief introduction of who we are here at ACT. Just 1 second. There we go. So ACT is the leading global provider of market-based solutions. In the past 14 years, we've been helping organizations hit both their compliance and environmental targets. This is done through a wide product offering, including all environmental commodities such as climate projects that generate carbon credits, renewable electricity and certificates, and many other, including, of course, the emission allowances for the EU ETS. ACT is, in fact, a MiFID II regulated carbon trading firm that will be able to help you navigate these new legislative waters. And finally, as a link directly to the maritime industry, we're actually also a producer and supplier of physical biofuels, which will be very relevant further on in this presentation when we discuss how to tackle the ETS for the future. So let's start off with a little bit of an eagle's eye view of what the ETS is and how it is applied to the maritime sector. As you all may know, from this year, ships above 5,000 GT will be subject to the EU ETS. This means that for voyages occurring inside of Europe, so from a European port to another European port, 100% of those emissions will be subject to the EU ETS. If the voyage is going either into or out of the EU ETS, then it's only 50% of those emissions that are counted. And then from 2027, offshore ships above 5,000 GT will also be included. In the meantime, in 2026, cargo and offshore ships of smaller sizes will also be evaluated for inclusion into the ETS. So currently we are at the first year of the so-called phase-in period. In this year, only 40% of the emissions are counted towards the ETS. This means that for a voyage going out of Europe, for example, it will be 50% of the emissions of these 40%. Then in 2025, this will be raised to 70%, and ultimately culminating in 2026, when the maritime industry will be fully integrated into the ETS. So let's have a look first at how the ETS actually functions. And we can begin with the market supply side of the story. There we have, firstly, the primary market auctions. This is the main way of introducing supply into the market. It is done through the European Energy Exchange, EEX, where on an auction basis, allowances are put into the market. In order to participate into the auctions, however, you need a clearing bank and financial service license, meaning that clients can opt into these auctions through the help of companies such as ACT. Beyond this, we also have the free allocations, which is another way of introducing supply into the market. Now, unfortunately for the maritime industry, no free allocations will be given to maritime companies. However, free allowances are issued to operators in the stationary industries. This is done so in order to prevent carbon leakage and, in general, to ease the financial burden of this green transition. However, keep in mind that these number of allowances, of free allowances, will be lowered every year until 2035, when there will be no more such allowances available. In general, both from the primary market auctions and the free allowance allocations, the amount that will be released will be lowered by 4.3% every year, because the basic premise of the ETS is for prices on the long term to keep on increasing in order to incentivize companies and industries to green themselves rather than continue purchasing allowances and emitting emissions. Then finally, we also have the secondary market. This is where all the trading actually occurs. This market functions very much like the stock market, meaning that based on demand and supply dynamics, prices can fluctuate just like in the stock market. If we in fact look at the price graph for the past 3 years, we can see that there is quite a hefty amount of volatility in this market. In fact, just over the course of the last year, we've gone from a high of 96 to a low of 55, where we are currently today. This is something that is very important to keep into account when developing procurement strategies. In fact, because this is a highly political market, but it is also a market that is connected to every single industry in Europe, it is prone to high degrees of volatility. However, if we look in the top right corner, where we can see that the average price forecast of the main analysts in this market, we can see a very clear trend. And that is the prices will continue to rise. Now, of course, this year we're currently seeing quite low prices due to the macroeconomic conditions in Europe. But if we look over the course of the next 5 to 6 years, we see that in 2030, a price of 144 euros is expected on average. So now that we have a basic understanding of how the ETS will work, let's have a look at the more specifics of the maritime industry per se. Let's start with, first of all, who is responsible. Now, the base obligation lies with the ship owner. However, through contractual obligations, this can be passed on to the ship management. In either case, though, whether ship owner or ship management, the responsibility is for all the vessels in the fleet in aggregate. What this implies is that when you need to surrender your EUAs through your ETS account to the relevant authorities, this will be done so in aggregate for all the vessels in your fleet, without earmarking the allowances for specific vessels. What this means is that even if you have one single vessel that is non-compliant, then your entire fleet becomes non-compliant. And this is a point that is very important to consider, especially when going into discussions with charterers. Now, as some of you may know, there have been new BIMCO terms released properly for the ETS, and more specifically for time charterers. Now, per these BIMCO terms, currently, charterers will either be invoiced for the emissions that they have created on the voyage, or will be obliged to transfer allowances to the ship owner to match those emissions. If it is the latter case, then this will be done on a monthly basis retroactively. So the ship owner will monitor the emissions, it will agree with the charter on the emissions created, and then once notified, the charter will have 7 days to transfer said allowances. Now, as mentioned, the obligation lies on a fleet level, meaning that in cases where the charter needs to transfer allowances over to the ship owner, there is quite a bit of risk from the ship owner's perspective. Firstly, if the charter fails to transfer the allowances, not only does the ship owner run into market risk, because as we saw, this is a highly volatile market, but potentially it could also run the risk of non-compliance. Therefore, it is very important to have strict relationships when discussing these terms. However, going past this, even once these terms are agreed, how does one actually procure EUAs? Well, as mentioned, this market functions very much like the stock market, meaning that the same approaches also apply. We have spot transactions, which is the most straightforward way of hedging your EUAs. It is simply implies that invoicing, payment of the invoice, and delivery of the allowances all has to occur within 5 days, 5 business days, that is. And it's as simple as that. Then we have forwards, which may reduce the upfront cash outlay, but is still allowing you to hedge a future price. However, it does come with some budgetary risk, as you may be subject to margin payments in order to maintain said position. And then the actual delivery and remaining payment all occurs at the expiry of the forward contract. And then finally, we also have options, where delivery and payment for the EUA only occur after expiry, and if the option is exercised. Now, because of this choice of whether or not to exercise the option, a premium also comes with this hedging strategy. But even if you do manage to procure the allowances, as many of you may know, currently not all shipping companies actually have an ETS account. In fact, it was only recently, 2 weeks ago, that the European Commission released a list with all companies, shipping companies outside of Europe, stating with which national authorities in Europe they have to submit an application in order to receive an ETS account. Now, even though this application may be under the way, there is still quite a bit of time until they actually receive that account. And in the meantime, if they have a voyage that is already en route, they're exposed to ETS market. So at ACT, we have therefore created a custodial and storage service. We have a custody foundation that is bankruptcy remote from ACT, where our clients can store their assets such as carbon allowances, and where they're completely safeguarded, meaning that they cannot be touched by us nor anyone else without your explicit consent. This allows shipping companies to already get active in the market today and hedge their costs already today before even having an ETS account. So this is the possibilities that currently exist on the ETS market. But of course, if we delve into a little bit more of an overarching procurement strategy, we can see that we've divided in 3 main steps. Now, of course, before going into these main steps, it's important to note that usually the way we operate is that we give tailor-made procurement strategies that fit your needs as a business. But in order to keep the conversation going here and to give you a bit of information on what to expect from this market, we have decided to divide these into 3 main overarching steps. Now, the first step is to simply de-risk. As this is a completely new market for you, you first need to understand what your carbon exposure actually is. Then you also need to understand when you need to fix the carbon price. And even once you've understood these 2 points, you need to set up with a trader. In this case, with ACT, you need to go through the KYC and due diligence process in order to be able to quickly lock in a carbon price before your voyages. And this is the very first step, because this first step is simply a setup step in order to be able to limit your exposure to the market and the market's volatility. If we then, once you start learning more about the market, we start getting into step 2, which is optimization. Now, in this second step, from our end, we will start to understand your necessities for hedging and understand your business model more appropriately. And from your end, you'll be more informed on the regulatory changes, on UA movements, on price drivers, and on the general functioning of the market. Once we have that basis, then we can start optimizing the EUA procurement. This can be done through derivatives such as forwards, repos, options. It can be done through more aggressive strategies to lower costs as much as possible, or it can be done as simply a complete de-risking strategy where you follow the market average in order to avoid price peaks. However, proceeding then on, we have step 3, which is the more long-term step. Here we're talking about long-term procurement contracts, not only for EUAs, but for biofuel. Because if you remember the forecast from earlier, as we can see, there is a clear trend of EUA pricing going up in the next few years, which means that biofuel will eventually become the more economic, viable alternative. And especially if we start looking at biofuels, there are certain demand dynamics that you need to understand, because it is important to start thinking about that already today. Now, if we look already this year with RED III, the obligation to blend biofuels in road and aviation transport will increase. And as many of you may know, biofuel supply is already quite small in comparison to the potential demand out there in the market. Then we also have from next year for EU maritime, where it will be mandatory for marine fuels to be blended with biofuels. So from the demand side, we see quite a potential rise over the course of the next few years, which is why it's important to begin securing volumes already this year. As mentioned earlier, in fact, ACT is both a producer and supplier of physical biofuel. And because we are fully vertically integrated, we're able to guarantee long-term and reliable biofuel delivery. So although this may be a very early topic, it is important to consider it, because you do have the possibility to enter into offtake agreements for the next even 3, 5, or 7 years, which with all the legislation coming your way is an important strategy. Let's not forget that even under the EU ETS, in fact, biofuels are seen as zero emissions. So, as mentioned though, this is more of an overarching strategy in order to explain to you what is needed now and what to think about in the future. Naturally, for more tailor-made and for better appropriate procurement strategies for your particular business, please do not hesitate to get into contact with me on the email or phone number that you see on your screen, where we can sit down and discuss how to properly tackle the ETS for not only this year, but for the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you very much for everyone listening. That will be all for me.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Simon, for sharing such insightful information. And now we welcome our second presenter, Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim is working as a EU UK MRV and IMO DCS CII verifier at Korean Register from 2018. As a verifier, he has been working on researching related to the energy integrated control system for autonomous ships. So, Mr. Kim, over to you.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation. It's a great honor to make a presentation here, organized by Varuna Marine Services. Today, I'd like to introduce you EU ETS on maritime sector. Let's briefly touch on the Korean register. KR was founded on 1960 and is a member of IAX. We were authorized by over 80 flag states. We have been providing the services through our global network. Also, KR has been providing the GHG verification services for EU, UK MRB, and IMO DCS, CII. EU and UK MRB, which was accredited by DAX and UCAS, respectively. From now on, I will start introducing EU ETS briefly. Mr. Simon introduced EU ETS for the overview, so I will mention the point which he did not introduce to you. So this EU ETS for the GHG emission, not only for CO2 and the CH4 and N2O will be included from 2026. The 50% of GHG emission for extra-EU voyage and 100% of intra-EU voyages will be counted for EU ETS. The phase-in period will be applied from 2024 to 2026 years, from 40 to 100%. In terms of penalty, there's a fine and the ships can be expelled if the company is not following the regulation for 2 consecutive years or more. Next, the EC has published the list of the administering authority for each shipping company. On the list, either registered owner or ISM company can be checked. For the responsibility for the EU ETS and MRB is for shipping company. Shipping company can be either registered owner or ISM company. The shipping company can pass on the EU ETS cost to the operator of the ship. For example, charter can be passed on the EU ETS cost. For that, the member state shall take necessary measure to ensure that. Lastly, the EC identified to Tangermet and Eastport site as neighboring container transshipment ports to reduce the carbon leakage. As the EU MRB regulation was changed last year, the GHG, including CH4 and N2O, should be reported as well. The emission factors for each fuel should be followed as tank-to-wake emission factor, and the fugitive and slipped emissions can be founded on the regulation. If the biomass meets sustainability and GHG energy saving criteria, emission factor will be 0 for EU ETS. The special rules and derogations will be applied as following, such as ice class ships and outermost regions. So the shipping company can follow the below timeline for complying with the EU ETS regulation. First, shipping company should ensure the responsibility for the EU ETS and MRV. After that, the shipping company need to request open maritime operator holding account. We call it MOHA. Next, the monitoring plan MP should be updated and verified by March 2024. Also, it should be submitted to administering authority by 1st April. Thirdly, the company should submit the verified emission report and company emission report by 31st March from 2025. Lastly, the shipping company should surrender the allowances equal to emissions at company level in the previous reporting period by September 30. So VKR is supporting the shipping company by platform KR Gears for GH verification. EU MRB, UK MRB, IMO DCS, and CII, and so on. Especially with the EU MRB data, the gears can automatically calculate the EU ETS emissions and can create the company emission report. Next, with the external EUA prices, the company can estimate the EU ETS cost by ships EU MRB. Actually, there are many stakeholders in shipping industry. Many shipping companies have been requesting we prepare this function and we are providing the void statement function for shipping companies to facilitate the EU ETS cost. Next, the company can create the updated monitoring plan on KR gears as well. Once it's verified, the company can download the XML file and upload it on Thetis MRV. On February 1st, we have published the technical information for all stakeholders to help understand the EU ETS regulations. We will keep following the ETS regulation and publish the relevant helpful information for GHG verification, all the stakeholders. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much for listening my presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Kim, for sharing such valuable information. And also, we welcome everyone who just joined in. Please type your question. Our panelists will address them during the Q&A session. So before we meet up our third panelist, come up your screen is a second poll question of today.
Welcome everyone. Just a quick reminder before we move forward, please keep sharing your questions from the Zoom control panel Our panelists will address them collectively during the Q&A session. So from your Zoom control panel, please keep sharing your questions. If at all during the presentation you have any questions, raise it from the Q&A section. Okay, so our third panelist for today is Mr. Sanjeev, Director of Varuna Marine Services, who is responsible for the strategic direction, vision, growth, and performance of the company. He is passionate about emission compliance, maritime cybersecurity, maritime sustainability, and maritime digitalization. Please welcome Mr. Sanjeev.
Thank you, Richa. And once again, welcome everybody who is listening to this important topic. So Varuna Marine, based out in Amsterdam with regional offices in India, Singapore, Malaysia, and Australia and US. We have been in the industry for the last 15 years and our verticals spread into different domains. For today's presentation, obviously, we will focus on the EU ETS and what we are doing in that space. But I would also like to point out our other verticals, may it be class approved ballast water treatment system, D2 tests, US EPA compliance and cybersecurity, maritime SATCOM, which we are doing with Starlink and flexible dissect contracts, IHM, which is again a class approved service from our end, and our in-house portal CyberSmart, which will also be talking to in the emission module that we have created for the compliance. So EU ETS overview, Mr. Simon and Mr. Kim have already laid down the groundwork for me, so I don't need to delve deeper into the EU ETS and the applicable and the complexities of the regulation. But what I will try to do is to point out the problem that we are facing in compliance, data cleaning on a day-to-day basis, and how we are solving it. So one important factor that I want to pick on is obviously UMRV already covered CO2, but now from 2024 we are also measuring and recording methane and nitrous oxide. It doesn't immediately impact EU ETS, but it will start to be taken into consideration from 2026 onwards. Why it is significant, even though you may think that the quantity of methane and N2O will be very low as compared to the conversion factors that we have for CO2, but the global warming potential is quite high. So the multiplication factor is quite significant if you compare as compared to CO2. So that is something you need to take into account. And the monitoring plan, as you would all know, needs to be updated to indicate how you are measuring CH4 and N2O before April this year, which will be submitted to the thesis MRV. Again, it's a cap and trade system, so that Simon and Mr. Kim has already touched upon. So approving of the monitoring plan, which I'm pretty sure as owners, you are all aware that you would be needed to do before April to EU ETS, which we are also helping through our partners, Korean Register. We are helping and drafting those plans and trying to get them approved before the deadline. So that is something that we are doing on our end as well. On terms of the carbon pricing and extraterritorial obligation, this is evolving. As Simon touched upon recently, transshipment port has been announced for especially the container shipping, and Tangier Med and Port Said in Egypt. And apart from that, obviously the predefined rules of 50%, 100% rules, depending upon the geographical spread of the voyage, start and end of the voyage also applies. So we have a little bit more clarity on terms of which voyage account for an EU ETS voyage and which voyage doesn't count for EU ETS. On the EUAs, again, we as Varuna Marine also possess a trading license from the Dutch Emission Authority. So we can facilitate flexible EUAs access on case-to-case basis. So we are doing very custom contracts with ship owners where necessary to facilitate EUA procurement as well. So that is something that we can as well help with. And in terms of the guidance on MOHA accounts or guidance on how to distribute your registries, we can also advise. Obviously, there are standard guidance coming from EU. So our guidance is built upon that. It's an insight that we have seen through the owners that we are working with already. And Simon has very well laid down the fluctuation of the prices that you see on the UA. So different trading strategies are there and being advised in the market. And we are, of course, also following the similar trading strategies depending upon the strategic direction that your business may have decided. So we'll be able to work in all those modularities as well. So as I said, I want to talk about more a little bit as to what are the problems we are seeing in terms of the complexities on the day-to-day job. While the overarching global the EU legislation is well written and I think very well executed, but there are things that is causing confusion on a day-to-day basis when we get report from the vessel. And now this needs to be understood in the context, the amount of ships that one have in the fleet, an amount of known reports and position reports and event reports that you are getting, and that needs to be compounded over all this legislation. So that becomes quite a large amount of data to process through. Now, when considering what should be considered as a port of call under the EU ETS, there are some caveats where we need to be aware of, like what is not included. So, for example, stop for the sole purpose of refueling, obtaining supplies, and how do we define these in our day-to-day filing of our and aggregation of that data to ensure that when we are actually calculating our UAs for a given voyage, whether on the voyage basis which is recommended or on an annual basis, it is quite accurate. So these caveats, like whether you are going to relieve your crew or dry dock, and these kind of things are building up on the complexities that we see. And I would like to demonstrate how we have tackled in our day-to-day operations for the vessels that we are managing. Again, this data problem is not new. So one thing you will see in the EU submission to IMO, everybody is talking about the data gaps and how to make it more seamless in terms of. So we had EU MRV regime, then you had IMO DCS regime, and they had some similarities and some differences. But this data gap is very well recognized, and EU is trying to reach out to IMO to be able to sync it as much as possible for more transparency and seamless data aggregation. So this is a recognized problem in the industry from what we see coming out of EU and IMO. So most common mistakes that we are seeing is the reporting sequence. So basically, most of the voyages that we calculate is the basis the arrival and departure. But as we all know, there are multiple events that are triggering, from starting of sea passage to end of sea passage to anchorage, drifting, STSs, and those complexities of the flow of those events has to be in a certain sequence. And that is something that we have tried to align in our day-to-day processing as to how those sequencing should be done, and where it stops, where it doesn't take into account, and where it should take into account. Again, reporting the reports are non-consecutive gaps. So this gapless reporting is easier said than done, because it's always you have to monitor the time as well as the consumption if you are monitoring with the consumption of the vessel. So ROBs versus how ROBs are tied to consumption and the time that we say we have. So we have developed some algorithm which actually takes into account the amount of time a vessel has a sea passage depending upon the initial profile of the vessel, and then we pick up those anomalies as and when it happens through the algorithm and through our manual testing at our emission desk. ROBs are not matching is one of the simplest one to do, but there are furthermore, it needs to be correlated with the events and the distance sailed, for example. And again, there are exemptions if you have a ice class ship and you have some distances under ice. So that has again 10% exemption till 2023. So this becomes quite a lot if you stack up all these specific rules and exceptions for your vessels, and it needs to be taken into account. Otherwise, the calculation is very prone to errors. And again, I would also like to emphasize the speed of calculation, right? So the EU MRV IMO DCS regime wanted an annual verification, which all operators had quite a lot of time to collect, clean the data, and then submit it to the verifiers to get it done. Obviously, in the evolving market where charterers want to know, where you as owners who want to know exposures at the very beginning or at least at the end of the voyage, so that all the respective invoices could be issued. So it's a very fast moving calculation, and that brings us to the point what we are doing and why we are doing, so that you have as accurate data as possible from vessel to conversion to US. Again, some exceptions as I was talking about. So we have taken 3 different categories of exceptions. So if a vessel is going from Rotterdam, from Wilhelmshaven to Rotterdam, that is an EU ETS voyage. But imagine the same vessel is calling Southampton for dry dock, and then after that she continues her voyage to Miami. Then how do we calculate the emissions under US? So as I was saying earlier, the dry dock call is not included in the EU ETS calculation. So in this case, the voyage would be treated as starting from Rotterdam and ending at Miami, and all the emissions that happen on in Southampton will also be a part of it. So that is one of the variations that we see. Again, if you have a new build vessel in a shipyard and then you call, let's say in this case Lisbon, at the first maiden voyage, that is not included, and then from there onwards that would be included, any second port that you call. Same at a decommissioning voyage, if you have a vessel which is going to a dismantling yard, the last leg is not counted under UETS. And so these are some of the examples that I thought to bring up today. The ICE class exemption, as I was talking earlier, 5% fuel allowances till 2030 is applicable. So this notation needs to be taken into account when we are onboarding the vessel. And as Simon also touched upon the fuel MRB and everything that is happening under biofuel, it is quite significant, going to significantly impact what we do, because we already have formula when you have a blend of biofuel. Then first of all, how do you verify the origin of biofuel? So there are certain guidelines from EU as to which biofuel actually count for the for reduction in emission. So that needs to be very carefully examined before making any procurement decision. But once that is done, then comes the point of calculating the amount of biofuel that was blended and how much lesser of carbon emission that could result into. So that calculation is also quite delicate and needs to be taken into account while you are calculating your voyage level emission, in case you have already started blending biofuels in your bunkers. So again, so these are some of the problems. Then what we have done to solve it, obviously, we have created CyberSmart, so our emissions module, which actually takes into account all this data, and we try to streamline the process. So what we like to call it is a human-machine interface, which is powered by LLM. So basically, we have all the data coming in from different sources. It's a plug-and-play web-based portal and fully compliant with EU GDPR regulations. And we have hosted it on the EU servers and cyber secure as well as a web-based application. So data comes in via API, CSV, Excel, depending upon how the operator is set up. You could send us data via very many options. And then the cleaning part and taking care of removal of error and aggregation, applying the relevant rule depending upon your vessel profile and your voyage arrival and departure is something that we are doing on our end. So the dashboard view is looking like this, but you can have a direct access to every voyage as soon as it finishes, and the data processing is almost real time for most of the voyages. But sometimes the data coming from the vessel may not be clear, and we may have to correct it before we actually make it live for the owners and the operators to download the EU emission report for that particular voyage. So we are trying to keep it up to the real time from what we see. And what we do at the back end is also these checks that I was talking about earlier, in terms of if there is an ROB match, if there is an event mismatch, ROB fuel consumption mismatch, distance sailed versus the consumption mismatch, or the event that we see that are relevant and not reported dry dock is one example. But fueling, how do you separate fueling event from, if it is only a fuel or a crew change event, that has an impact whether it counts for you voyage or not. So that is something that will be done at the data cleaning stage from our end, and then only it will be pushed. So every voyage log we keep a very close eye, especially when it is the voyage had ended and we want to issue the final data set and the final report. We are checking and releasing it to the operator's dashboard, which you can access it through a web-based portal, and it doesn't require any specific installation. So at any given point of time, you will have the voyage highlight, fuel and consumption EU ETS, and all these energy efficiencies will be auto calculated within the dashboard that we are providing you. So you will also see that the breakdown that we have is also for 2024. But as you know, in 2025 and 2026, the proportional contribution has to be more. So we have also calculated for 2025 and 2026, so that you know, if you make the same voyage in 2025 and 2026, how much you will be owing. So you have to, you can calibrate against that correction already. So in short, just to summarize, so accuracy in data is what we are trying to bring, data cleaning and processing, because obviously the guidance is there, but when the data and the amount of processing is needed, our human machine interface, I think, is very well poised to take on that challenge head on, and we have seen very accurate results from the data that we have on the system. Voyage level overview reporting right from the dashboard, so you don't need to wait. As soon as the voyage is completed, you have the immediate report that you can share with your charters. Obviously, if you need it to be verified, then it takes a little longer because it needs to go through verification. But the actual calculation is already there. All the breakdowns are there that can be downloaded and shared. It is a web-based portal. It's a plug and play. So one of the common questions we often get is how how do you get the data and how long it will take you to onboard the system and all that. So I just want to address that any sort of data exposure you have, may be an API from an existing system that you may already have. CSVs are also accepted, Excels are also accepted. So in terms of data acquisition, we are very agnostic. Any kind of sources we can very well take and process data on our end. So onboarding is fairly quick on our end, so that we can assure you that there will be no downtime or any glitches or long integration processes involved with experiences that we have at the moment. We, of course, as Varuna Marine, can give you access to UA via primary and secondary markets with our trader's license as well, and make custom contracts with you as to how you want to take on the UA market through hedging or other means that you feel deem fit for your business. Of course, if you have, I see a lot of question on the chat for U registry. We have a lot of guidance on U registry, setup account. How do you break it down? If you look at the list what you released a couple of weeks ago, you will see different companies have taken different approach. Some companies have registered one account on every single voyage. Sorry, not voyage, vessel. And that is just to, I would think, it follows the same rule where you register a vessel as a different company altogether. So it's kind of neutralizing that risk, and that practice we see. But also there are companies who have registered one MOHA account for multiple ships, while companies who have registered multiple MOHA account, even though the fleet belongs to one operator. So there are different models, and I think it needs to be understood what are the construction that best fits you, which we can obviously discuss. As Varuna Marine, we have local presence in global ports, so we will be able to provide you with up-to-date solutions in any time zone that you may be based on, or your vessels may be calling. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions or any follow-up you would like to do, please feel free to reach out at info@Varuna Marine. One of us would be very happy to take on and get in touch. So over to you, Richa. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, now here I'll request all of our three panelists to review the questions that have been generated so far and like pick up 2 to 3 questions that you would like to answer. I'll give you some moment before you dive into the questions. You can review the questions, prepare your answers, which questions you want to tackle. And for our audience, coming up on the screen, we have another poll question, our poll 3 of today. All right. So coming back to our panelists now, I would request our first panelist, Mr. Simon, to share the questions that he wished to tackle and answer away.
Yes, thank you very much. Firstly, as a first question, I thought it was quite interesting to answer the question by Natalia Bello-Martin in regards to charters who do not have a trading account. There are two possibilities here, actually. Firstly, they can apply for a trading account in Europe if they have a physical presence. Earlier in the year, it was possible to apply for such a trading account even without physical presence in Europe through countries such as Malta. But due to the heavy influx of applications, that route has been basically closed for the time being. However, as an alternative solution also, instead of getting a trading account, it is also possible to simply store the allowances on our custody account, as mentioned during the presentation. This will lower a bit the administrative work as well as the due diligence process, because as a trading house, we have a slightly slimmer, let's say, due diligence process than the national authorities, and we can get you up and running a bit quicker. Then there were also a couple of questions in regard to the actual submitting of allowances at the end of the year. Please note that this is not done automatically, but is done. It has to be done manually, meaning that at the end of the year, when you have the needed allowance on your account, you will need to log in and manually surrender those allowances. And beyond that, as a final question or overarching question, I suppose it would be, in general, when applying for these accounts with the relevant authorities, of course, it can be quite difficult sometimes to get in touch with the right authorities or know exactly where to apply and how to apply. And even in those with those issues at hand, you're always more than welcome to contact me or any of my colleagues, and we can help you set up your account. We have been in this market for 14 years, so we have quite the network with all the relevant authorities in every European country and can help guide you also from a language barrier point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Mr. Kim to come in with his questions and answers, please.
Yes, I picked the question from Sunawan Sanatani. He or she asked me if there's a requirement to submit the verified monitoring plan to the administering authority. So actually the monitoring plans in accordance with the revised MRV regulation is now mandatorily submitted through TETIS MRV. Also, shipping companies need to submit the monitoring plan for each of their ships within the scope of MRV regulation and ETS directive to their administering authority by 1st April 2024. So by that date, the monitoring plan should be verified by the accredited verifier and should be submitted to the administering authority on TETIS MRV. Now I checked second question from Rajat Buhat. He or she asked me the emission is the emission cost only applied to extra Europe and intra Europe voyages? So my answer was the emissions within EU ports and at bus EU ports should be reported as well, as same as previous EU MRV regulation. So the emission within EU port and at bus EU port should be reported. If ship did not carry out the cargo operation following the definition of port of call in EU ports, the emissions for those voyages will not be taken into account. So that's all the question all I picked.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to invite Mr. Sanjeev to present the question and answers.
Thank you, Richa. What I see is for a question from Francisca Stoll, and she was asking about the MOHA and the distribution of responsibilities. And I think that has been a general theme for some of the questions. So again, the distribution, whenever a vessel changes ownership, that will be a part of how you take over a ship now. I think it will become fairly standard when you are taking over a ship after 2024. What happened before that, and what was the UA obligations, and how that needs to be settled. So that I think would be always done now for any new takeover in after 2024. So and apart from that, also structuring MOHA, there are different structures we have seen. So that has been it could be deciding of the administrative authority, for example. So I think that is all I could see, and that's fine. Over to you, Richard.
Okay, just in case if any questions have been missed out, no. So we'll be coming up with the written answers to these questions, and you will be redirected to them. Even the recordings of the webinar and every other materials of the webinar, you will be redirected to it in a few days. Now, all right. Now, I like to request our panelists to give consideration to the conclusions and key takeaways for today's webinar and for our wonderful audiences. While our panelists are preparing the key takeaways, I would here like to bring up the fourth poll of today. These polls will help us as I was saying, that this poll will help us know your opinion on the EU ETS market. All right. Now, to conclude our today's session, I would like our panelists to take over, starting from Mr. Simon, followed by Mr. Kim, and then Mr. Sanjeev.
Thank you. I believe the main key takeaway from this discussion is that preparation is key. Whether it's in regards to the ETS or biofuels, not only is it important to be set up for this, but it is also important to start learning about the market, its intricacies, and start looking at the long term. Now, of course, the ETS is already here. So it means setting up with your traders, setting up accounts, start that basic understanding of the drivers of this market in order to understand when it is you need to lock in your hedges, when it is you need to purchase that carbon. And then for the next 5 to 10 years, start looking seriously at the biofuels as an alternative way to bring down your costs in the future. Because even though it might feel like it's early today, as we have discussed, the demand and supply dynamics of the biofuel market are quite unique in the sense that it's very important to start looking into long-term offtake agreements even there in order to secure your volumes, because supply currently is severely lower than the demand. That I would say is the key takeaway from my end, at least. Thank you.
Thank you for today's webinar. So my key takeaway, also I agree with Mr. Simon's opinion. The preparation is the most important thing. So I summarized actually as a 5 or 6 steps with my explanation. So the company should first should ensure the responsibility for EU ETS and MRV between registered owner and ISM manager, and open an account with the union registry, confirming the administrating authority. Secondly, the monitoring plan should be updated and should be requested to verification. And then finally, the shipping company should submit approved monitoring plan to administering authority. Actually, there is updated contents on the monitoring plan, so you should keep an eye on the updated EUMRB regulation. Thirdly, the monitoring GHG emissions is important. So at the EUMRB stage, the CH4 and N2 should be monitored as well. Fourthly, the company emission report was newly introduced. So the company should be aware or familiar with the company emission report. Finally, my key takeaway is to keep the deadline. So I hope the shipping company is keep following the deadline for the surrendering allowances or submit the monitoring plan to administering authority and so on. Yeah, thank you. That's my key takeaways.
Thank you. I fully agree with Mr. Simon and Mr. Kim. What I would like to take away from what is happening right now in this domain is accuracy of data would become more and more important once your initial administrative setup and deadlines have been figured out, which is of course very important. Then on a day-to-day basis, the amount of data that we will have be processing on a ship level and actually having financial impact on the UAs is quite crucial. So that calculation methodology has to be robust, accurate. Data cleaning has to be scrutinized way more than what we did in only UMRV and IMO DCS regime, where there was room for error and where there was room for corrections. But here, maybe because of the space of decision making, it may not allow much room. So once an error is made, it can be working against us. So that is very important. And apart from the fuel EU that is coming on and the emphasis on biofuel and reducing your intensity, so the complications are only growing. So while choosing your methodology to comply, it is important to see whether all those corrections can be taken into account. A partner which is futuristic and let you handle all those in a digital way, yet accurate. So that would be my takeaway from this. Thank you. Over to you, Richa.
Thank you, sir. So I would here like to thank all of our 3 speakers for sharing valuable insights and expertise with us today. And a big thank you to the audience and for your active participation. If there is any services or help that you need, please drop us an email either at info@varunamarine.eu or marketing@varunamarine.eu as it is listed in the screen. So that concludes our today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you at our future events. Until then, safe voyages and sustainable seas. Thank you.